Welcome back to Specter of Torment. Last time we recruited both Mole Knight and King Knight, and we also had a flashback sequence where we fought a unique boss for Specter of Torment, Shield Knight. This time, first thing we're doing is grabbing the new curio that you unlock for defeating Mole Knight, the Chronos coin. As you can probably tell by the name, it's a coin that has the ability to slow down time, not quite stop it. It does take up a lot of darkness, but you can slow down enemies, platforms, pretty much any hazard around you, or anything around you, can be slowed down. You can kind of tell how much time you have left in the slowed time by the coin that you throw. When Specter Knight activates the ability, he flicks a coin upward, and that coin will spin. As long as it's spinning, that's basically how much time you have left within that slowed time. When it stops spinning and falls to the ground, your time in slowed time is up. It's hard to describe without saying time a lot. The upgraded version of the curio increases the amount of time you have in the slowed time. It slows down time for longer, is what I'm trying to say. And if you couldn't tell already, I'm pretty much going in the same order that I did for the last two campaigns with these remaining knights. So up next is going to be Treasure Knight, and then Polar Knight during this part, and lastly, we're going after Propeller Knight. One of the new gimmicks that is very apparent at the beginning of the stage is this cluster of bubbles, or maybe this single bubble here. It appears in the water and usually floats to the surface, and you can use it as a dash slash target. When you do attack it, it will bounce all over the place. Usually just in the direction that you were attacking in, but if it does come across a wall, it will bounce backwards away from the wall, so you'll have to make sure you know what you're doing with that. And it's a pretty neat mechanic. I like it because you can pretty much use just the ball to get around places. You don't have to actually step down onto a platform and then start, your dash slash all over again, which I'm going to feature right here. You can see that I go backwards and I reuse the dash slash without touching the ground. That's mostly because of the water in the stage though. Because we're underwater, we're more buoyant. Or rather, we're still as buoyant as we were, it's just that that buoyancy is taking effect. Either way, you'll fall down slower while underwater, and because of this, you can get a lot of height with just one climbable wall. I'll talk about that in 1 second. First, I want to show off that you can actually destroy these previously indestructible snails. Last time they were just, last games, I guess, they were just hazards that you had to avoid. But in this campaign, you can destroy indestructible things with the Dread Talon. Again, making it the most useful of the curios in my opinion. Back to what I was saying about being underwater though. Because we are underwater, we get a lot more height, and with only one wall we can attain a ton of height. Basically what you do is, while underwater, you jump off of a wall, and at the peak of your jump, you change your midair direction, and since you fall so slowly, you can go back to the wall that you just jumped off of, and basically jump off of it again to get even more height. Makes it pretty easy to avoid bottomless pits, I guess. There are still going to be cases where that won't be very useful, but it's something good to know. You could get a lot of airtime in this stage because of it. Another thing that the Dread Talon can destroy is those tentacle monsters, and you'd think, well, you could do that anyway, but the Dread Talon can destroy them from any point. It doesn't have to be their little eyeball. You can hit the side of them and they'll basically be obliterated, which makes getting that last red skull actually quite a lot easier. In this stage, the enemies aren't really anything new. There's nothing I can recall that's very new. One thing I do remember is those green eel things that pop out of nowhere. If they're above water, they start flopping around. That's pretty much the only new thing that they do. And it's a very rare occurrence too, because there's not a lot of cases where they are going to be above water. And they also come out of these bubbles, as you can see. Or maybe they didn't come out of the bubbles, maybe they just spawned in above the bubbles. I guess there's also the things on the floor that shoot out bubbles upward. You can slash at those bubbles, and once you do, they become dash/slash targets for you, so you can use them for platforming, and you actually will have to after we get past the halfway point of this stage. And if you've played the other campaigns, you probably know what denotes the halfway point. We're pretty much already there, actually. Just want to get all the money I can before actually heading there, and that includes destroying the checkpoint. This looks familiar, doesn't it? It's the anglerfish boss, who is made a lot easier, at least during the chase sequence in this version. You can constantly just dash/slash on the treasure chest, and you won't be invincible. You can still take some hits, but because we're underwater, taking a hit isn't that detrimental. You can correct yourself in midair after taking one. And we pretty much made it to the arena. This arena is a little bit different from the other ones. Actually, it's very different from the other ones. Rather than having a pair of platforms that you could jump onto, it's instead one big floor with the left side having a bunch of bubbles. So be careful with where you step, I suppose. You can accidentally dash/slash downward into those bubbles and destroy them immediately, so you're gonna have to take caution with that. A weird thing about the anglerfish boss, though, is that he doesn't actually drop his treasure chest in this version. He instead explodes into a bunch of fish and some money. And those fish actually can be eaten, I guess. I'm not sure exactly what Specter Knight does with them, but if you do come into contact with them, you will regain your will. Right here is the only occurrence of that enemy, and I completely obliterated him. The one that surrounds himself with fireballs, I guess, and then shoots them at you. That's the only time we see him in this stage, as I recall. Something that I really like about this stage, and about the Mole Knight stage, actually, is how the stages start out. In both of those stages, you're above the surface, like you're not in the water, or rather you're not in the submarine for this stage, and you haven't actually gone into the Lost City with Mole Knight stage. I just find it kind of aesthetically pleasing, I guess. Though it does beg the question of why Specter Knight starts out there. Technically the farthest point from the Enchantress's tower would be the plains. And we started out at the very beginning of the plains. So shouldn't Specter Knight technically be able to just warp in to whatever point is in between the plains and the tower, which is every other stage in the game? Kind of doesn't make sense. It's that age-old Mega Man question of why doesn't he just warp into the boss room? And of course the out-of-game answer would be we wouldn't have a game. It's just kind of a dumb question to ask, to take up time. This is another hazard slash gimmick of this version of the stage. This big fish here, kind of reminiscent of Mario 3 with its boss bass, I believe the name of it was. Basically, it'll skim the surface of the water. You can slash at it to knock it backwards, but your slashes won't really kill it. The only ways to kill it are what I'm about to show off. To get the anchor to fall on it, it will then turn into fish that you can eat. Or you can use the dread talon on it a couple of times and that will destroy it. Though it is a couple of times that you have to do it, you can't automatically destroy it in one hit. Getting hit by that fish will take away 2 dots of your health, rather than just 1 or instantly killing you like in Mario 3. Well, I guess it didn't actually instantly kill you. If you came into contact with it, only it ate you. But it's not an instant kill hazard, so it's not too much to worry about. And there are ways to destroy it. It's not as easy as chucking a fireball, but you make do with what you got. we're pretty close to the boss right now. And the section does change up a little bit for the final boss, I guess. No, not the final boss, just the run up to the boss. Rather than just riding this one torpedo straight to the boss, we actually have to jump off a bunch of other torpedoes that are just going in the opposite direction, and a lot slower than in the other campaigns too. Either way, we're at the boss now, so now I gotta talk about him. I think Treasure Knight is one of the easiest bosses in this game, though I'm not going to be showing how easy he is because I try again for that curio feat where you only beat a boss using curios. The reason he's a lot easier is that after taking down a bunch of his health, he will drain the water. And at this point he really has no escape from your slash attacks, and it makes it really easy to attack him without performing a dash slash. So you can get a lot of damage in on him very easily. His bombs now have different properties. They, rather than just floating up, they bounce around after you destroy them. And when he slams into the ground, rather than a bunch of sand coming out, a bunch of coins come out that roll along the ground. And you have to avoid those, I guess. But overall, a lot easier than in the other version of the game. There is one attack that I think he omits in this version. It's the one where he summons a treasure chest that causes a whirlpool, and if you get sucked into the treasure chest, you lose some money. Because the boss battle doesn't take place underwater as much, I guess he doesn't do that attack anymore. But we beat him. And the next curio that we unlock for beating Treasure Knight is the Hover Plume, the one that I probably used the most in my original campaign. Or original run through the campaign, I should say. Makes you a little more like Specter Knight was in his boss fight. You can float around if you press the curio button. I'm not sure what word I was looking for there. It's not totally unlimited. You only get a brief period of time to do so, and if you slash, then you will cut off your upwards momentum. But if you're fallen near a bottomless pit, you can save yourself by using the Hover Plume, or you can make a bunch of platforming areas a non-issue by just using the Hover Plume. Especially with the Raiment of Risk's darkness thing, where it constantly regains darkness if you destroy the checkpoint. You're basically not going to have any problems with getting any of the red skulls if you use the Raiment of Risk along with the Hover Plume. The upgraded version makes it a bit more like the Phase Locket. When you hover, you'll be briefly invincible. I think when you slash out of using the Hover Plume, you actually lose your invincibility. It won't go for as long as the duration of the Hover Plume's invincibility usually is, so kind of weird, I guess, but whatever. We're grabbing a new armor for this stage, I guess. I'm going to be getting out of this armor, but this is the Ghostly Garb, and I'm not sure if you're able to see it, because I'm not sure if you're looking at this in 30 frames per second, but rather than having the sparkles that the other armors have when you jump, you instead have little after images following you, and it's Baz! We're not having a boss fight with Baz. He's actually just here to fill a quota, I guess. I suppose it also gives him a reason to want to beat Shovel Knight in the original campaign, because he wants to take the title of a knight because he couldn't become one of the Order of No Quarter or something like that. I don't know. Baz is the last of the developer for a day characters we're going to be seeing. Sadly, Mr. Hat does not appear in this campaign, though we already know his opinion on hoods, and that is he doesn't like them. Back to the Ghostly Garb. The after images are actually a bit more helpful than just the sparkles that the previous armors had. The previous flashy armors specifically. Because the after images appear no matter what, whether or not you're jumping, whether you're just running on the ground, they'll still appear. which makes it more useful for those dark sections where you need to keep track of yourself, you know, only by jumping with those other armors. This one you could do it while running, while slashing, while jumping, whatever you need to do. Another thing that's pretty special about it is the running animation. I really like it. It's instead skating, which I suppose is a reference to Shadow the Hedgehog because he's the original Ow the Edge character, and Specter Knight is trying to be that a little bit. With this ghostly garb, we can emulate everyone's favorite Sonic character, and that was me being facetious. I don't actually know if he's everyone's favorite Sonic character. Another cool thing this armor does is actually the dash slash animation. I really like how it looks. Rather than actually slashing through an enemy, it's more like you're phasing through them, which I think is kind of cool. Speaking of cool, Polar Knight's level. Didn't really mention what the gimmick is here, but you probably already saw it. Well, one of them. It's grind rails. This stage is the one that prominently features them. We did get a little bit of practice with them back at the tower, but this is where they're featured prominently. And we have a mini boss. This boss is, I suppose, based off of those platforms that can barf out rainbows for you to stand on. It works kind of the same way. You hit it in the mouth and it'll barf out rainbows for you to stand on, which you can use to continuously ground slash at its mouth. He does have another attack that I didn't show off. If you let him fly across the screen, when he comes back the second time, he will actually barf out a rainbow projectile, and that projectile will travel across the screen, and then once it finishes making its way across, it will split into 8 other projectiles that will go across the screen. It's kind of difficult to avoid, but if you just continuously attack the mouth whenever you have the chance to, you're not really going to be getting hit by it. Here's the other gimmick for this stage, the switches. When you attack them, it will either change the platforms that are around you, or rather, change the positioning of these logs, which can work as platforms, or, we'll see this later I guess, it can change the direction of grind rails. So depending on the color of the grind rails will change, and then you can go in the opposite direction, as we're going to be seeing right here. Kind of reminds me of Zelda, I suppose, with the colored switches changing the ways that blocks were positioned. Like certain blocks only came out of the ground when the color was red, and when the color was blue, then the blue blocks would come out of the ground and such. I'm not sure if that's what they were going for, but it's what I think they were going for, and it's what I recognize the most, so I'm saying that's what they're going for. One of the things that I neglected to mention before about the tower is your progress, I guess you could say. When you finish a level and head back to the tower and Specter Knight's reminiscing with the Phase Locket, you can actually see the stages that you've beaten appear at that balcony. Well, in the distance, but you can see them from that balcony. It's kind of weird that the stages do appear there, because it's not like we're moving the stages, we're just recruiting the knights. I don't know why they did it that way. It is a nice way of showing progress, and I like seeing the stages in the distance, but it's kind of odd that they made it that way. Another thing I wanted to talk about was relationships in these games, and I don't mean romantic relationships, I mean like just how people relate to each other, I guess. That's the best way of putting it. Like Polar Knight. He apparently knows Shovel Knight and Black Knight, right? And then Black Knight and Shovel Knight know Shield Knight, which means Polar Knight might know Shield Knight, I guess. And then we know that Donovan, aka Specter Knight, knows Shield Knight because he fought her for the amulet. And we also know that Black Knight knows Donovan, but we don't have any tell that Polar Knight knows Donovan, or that Shovel Knight knows Donovan. So how exactly do they relate to each other? Black Knight just kind of knows everyone, I guess. He's the one who connects everything, which is kind of weird. I'm not sure if he was an option for one of the campaigns, but it would have been cool if we could see exactly what goes on between all of these knights via Black Knight. Away from that tangent, I neglected to talk about these new enemies. There are some, I was going to say board railers, no, rail boarders, I guess you could call them. These guys who just grind on the rails at their own leisure. They do touch damage you, so they are technically an obstacle. But they aren't that big of a deal, and you can slash while on the rails, so it's pretty easy to defeat them. This whole ending section though, you kind of want to make sure you know when you're slowing down and when you're speeding up so that you can actually avoid the hazards that are coming up. And now we have Polar Knight, the boss that I was just talking about. This is a very easy boss. Rightfully so, they did make him only worth 1,000 gold. He does his second phase, I guess you could call it, a lot earlier than in the other campaigns. You only need to take down 1 dot of his health for him to start jumping into the air and shovel dropping to create spikes. And I am not having very much time to talk about him. He's pretty much dead. I killed him with my curios. Basically, the arena is a lot wider, so you have a lot more space. He can create pillars that he summons from the sky, I guess, and you can use them to run up and get on top of. He'll ram into the pillars when he's scooping up his snowballs to destroy them. That's pretty much it. He's really, really easy. And we have another flashback. This is the last one in this game, and rather than being something that we actually play through, it's straight up just a cutscene showing pretty much what the deal was between Specter Knight and the Enchantress, or rather Donovan and the Enchantress. Donovan, in his dying breath, wishes, I guess, to live for a little longer. So the Enchantress basically makes him into her Specter Knight in exchange for a couple of things. One, he's going to be the person who collects knights for the Order of No Quarter. He needs to retrieve 8 of them. And when he does, his Phase Locket will have the power to, I guess, bring someone back to life. Or maybe return someone to their former selves. I don't know exactly what the deal is with the Phase Locket here. Either way, Specter Knight is now in servitude of the Enchantress. He isn't technically one of the Order of No Quarter. She just is kind of using him to get what she wants right now. Because we beat Polar Knight, one of these rail riders actually appears near the grind rails, and he tells you that you can actually perform tricks off of the grind rails. I just knew that from watching like one promotional video from like Game Explain or something like that. Because we beat Polar Knight, for some reason a birder appeared, and that birder will give us some money. I don't know what the relation is. Honestly, that birder should have appeared when we beat Mole Knight, because I don't think anyone appears after beating Mole Knight, and we already have the Rail Rider appearing after beating Polar Knight. But whatever. After beating Polar Knight, we get this new curio, the Spider Scythe. And I guess it is an apt name. When you throw the scythe, after a bit of a delay, it will start writing on whatever walls or surfaces that you threw it on. It can also destroy the dirt piles for you. And it takes a little while for it to disappear. It also can go through enemies, so it can have multiple hit properties. A pretty cool curio, but one really only useful in certain situations. Unlike, say, the Dread Talon or the Hover Plume, which have a lot of uses. And we're going to go after the upgraded version of it right now. And I'm keeping this ghostly garb on until we beat the final knight. Anyway, the powered up version makes it so that it retrieves gold and the size is increased. As you can see, the radius kind of doubles. Other scythes come out of the one spider scythe, so that's kind of cool. We're pretty much at the end of the part now, so next time we're going to be going after that final knight, Propeller Knight.